The great Kahan Matithia Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh, you may be seated. Shabbat Shalom, brothers and sisters, great saints of Yahweh. It's truly a privilege and honor to come before the great called out saints of Yahweh here at Yahweh's house on the great Sabbath day. What a great honor it is to be a part of this great house and to be able to be here at another great weekly Sabbath, to be able to learn the great wisdom of Yahweh which comes forth weekly here from this great house, from Yahweh's last day's witness. If you will be turn over in your book of Yahweh to Genesis chapter 1. We truly are so blessed to be called out of this god-awful world that we see getting awfuler and awfuler as the days go by. You turn on the news, read the news, have to go out amongst the Gentiles, and we see the misery that the world is in at this time because of the rejection of Yahweh's laws and the rejection of the priest who teaches peace at Abel. We see here in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, with what the great deacon brought last week, that we don't want to be recreated in God's image. We want to be able to prove ourselves in the created image that Yahweh has made us into. And in Genesis 1:26, then Yahweh said, I will make man in my image according to my likeness, and they will have rulership over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So we see Yahweh made us with the potential to become something really great, something really awesome, to have a great position, great authority, and to have that ability to bring peace, joy, and abundant living to life, to all life, and to all the creation that Yahweh has made. Now if we go over the next page here on page 3 of your book of Yahweh in Genesis chapter 4, we see the warning that Yahweh had given here in the very beginning, that He gave to Cain in Genesis 4 verses 6 through 7. So Yahweh said to Cain, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? If you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do righteousness, sin is crouching at your door. The desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it. Okay, so He gave the warning that the desire to sin is with us. You know, this carnal mind that Yahweh has given us, which is enmity against Yahweh, but He's given it to us so that we can prove ourselves for this great position that we see there in Genesis 1:26. And if you go over to Romans on page 878, you go over to Romans chapter 6. But Yahweh, He did give the warning that the desire to sin is with us. Okay? We see here in Romans chapter 6 and verse 16, do you not know that to whom you yield yourselves as servants to obey, His servants you are whom you obey, whether of sin which leads to death, or of obedience which leads to righteousness. So we see here there's only two choices, just as is spoken in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 19 for your notes. We see there's two choices, whether obedience to Yahweh's laws, which brings life, or disobedience, rebellion, obedience to the evil ways that Satan brings, which brings death. So we see here that the desire to be a servant of Satan is with all of us, was with all of us from our birth, and was with all of mankind throughout the earth today. This desire to be a servant of Satan, because Satan's system, it looks pleasing. You know, it's desirable on the outside, as the great high priest Yeshua Messiah said, you know, that on the outside these things look beautiful and great, but inside it's rotten and it's death, and it brings death to your body. If you go over to Romans chapter 1 and verse 21, just a couple pages back on page 873, Romans 1 and verse 21. You know, and truly in the world today, you know, quickly here, we'll, in the reverence of Yahweh, chapter 23, and this is back in 1990, and we can just think of the increase in technology since 1990, okay? But here's in 1990, where pastor's saying, in verse 4 here on page 219 of the fourth book, he usually says, please listen now, everyone pay attention to me. Look up here at me, everyone, look at my lips. Read my lips, as the old saying goes. Get every word that I say to you, is important, just like it has been for every established work of Yahweh that has taken place on the face of the earth. I don't get up here and just try to figure out something to talk about. No, pastor's not bored and he's trying to figure out a way to spend his Sabbath day, so he just gets up here and just speaks. No, that's not true. You can see pastor's a very busy man, the busiest man on the face of the earth. Actually takes time out of his own schedule to come and serve Yahweh's people. Praise Yahweh for that awesome example of servitude. I don't try to cut it down to, or I try to cut it down to where I can get it all in. I have a lot to talk about. You know, this book goes from Genesis to Revelation, and it's all for our benefit. You know, as pastor shows, inside of one scripture, you know, there's 1,000 years of sermons that can be brought on one thing. Now in verse 19, here's the warning pastor gives. He says, "Let me tell you, Satan has some tremendous tools right now to keep everyone away from Yahweh's work and Yahweh's way. You have been brought up in that atmosphere of sin. Yahweh has now called you out of that into a different atmosphere, an atmosphere of training for a job in the kingdom of Yahweh." He says, in fact, in verse 31 here on page 221 of the fourth book of Israel, in fact, we are being invited and summoned to it. We're being pleaded with to come and partake of this great kingdom. This is the kingdom that's going to be given to the sons of Yahweh. You know, who we can be. We can be the sons and daughters of Yahweh. That's the opportunity that Yahweh's offered us here, calling us out of this world, calling us to His house, bringing us to the priest who teaches peace, to show us how to prove ourselves to qualify for this great position. This is the kingdom that's going to be given to the sons of Yahweh, who He is now calling, and who must overcome this world with all of its pulls and glitter and things that seem so desirable. The world seems more desirable now than ever before. You know, this is back in 1990. You know, you still hadn't had the invention of these great tools of Satan that she uses these days to try to get inside your mind and get you to go her way, okay, to have that desire, to feed that desire to sin, okay, instead of starving it to death and getting it out of us. Satan in the world today has put forth an abundance of unclean food to fill this desire to sin so that we can be servants of her. You know, we must truly be on guard against these things. We have covered this before, so I'm just going to rehearse it very quickly. He talks about the things that take place. Then he says the judgment is set. Remember, you're being judged right now. Remember the scripture that judgment begins first at the house of Yahweh. You know, we have been called out of this world of sin, out of the deception. This veil of deception has been lifted from our eyes, and we're now being judged in Yahweh's house. Yahweh's seeing, are we going to obey His servant, or are we going to go off our own way, just as millions and billions of people do, just as the elders of Israel do when they rejected, or did, when they rejected the great priest Samuel, when they rejected his way and they wanted their own rulership, their ways of kings, which allowed them to do whatever seems desirable. Everyone who is called out of this world and baptized into the great family of Yahweh is being judged. Everything that they do, say, and think is being written in a book. Okay, so you see the importance of practicing self-control. More importantly, the STOP acronym. To guard your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, because off of those things we're going to be judged. And this is being written in our own books. You know, as we have the books of Yisrayl, okay, which will be opened and used for all eternity to teach the entire universe, Yahweh is going to open our books to see, did we qualify for this great position that Pastor offered us? Everything they do, say, and think is being written in a book, as I have shown you in the sermons before this. Now let's see here what occurred when the wisdom of Yahweh was given to mankind. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 21, we see, you know, they jumped on it, right? And they ran with it, and they lived by it. No, that's not the way it was. Just as it was in the beginning, where Cain, even after being warned, being taught, being shown this is not the right way, he still went from the right way and turned to that which is wrong. In Romans 1 verse 21, because that when they knew Yahweh, when they knew Him, when they knew of His laws, when they saw the righteousness that came from those things, they did not glorify Him as Father, nor were thankful, but became idolatrous God worshippers, worshippers of Elohim, and their reasoning and their senseless minds were darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the uncorruptible Father for images made to resemble corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. You can see, when they knew of Yahweh and they knew of His perfect way, the way to life, when they knew of His plan, that He would appoint teachers, righteous men, that He would call forth from the wombs of their mothers, and He would bring them to teach His way, mankind turned from those things. Just as as it says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. It's the same thing in these last days, where pastor offers this light to this dark world, and it's rejected because Satan's way seems more desirable. Satan's way produces more money. Remember, as pastor said, how does mankind choose their government officials, their leaders? Who wins the presidency? Is it the most righteous man, the most moral man, the one who's going to change society to a more moral way of living? No. It's the one who's going to offer the best minimum wage, or the best paying jobs, or the best health care. The one who offers the most riches to fulfill their lusts so they can go off and spend these riches on their own lusts. Now, if you turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, found on page 152 of your book, Yahweh's. The title of the sermon today is Yisrayl Hawkins is showing us how to come into unity with Yahweh. Yisrayl Hawkins is showing us how to come into unity with Yahweh. And we see here in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, this is positive law number 2. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Father, Yahweh is one. Okay, and positive law number 2 is submit to Yahweh as the supreme head to be in unity with Yahweh. In the third volume of the Peaceful Solution Law Commentaries that Pastor put out, the first law in the third volume is positive law number 2. Submit to Yahweh as the supreme head to be in unity with Yahweh. And some of the definitions here, we want to read a couple of these definitions. We see here in Deuteronomy 6:4 says, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Father, Yahweh is one. We see here the word hear is to hear, to listen, to obey, to understand the confession of faith. And from the American Heritage Dictionary, it's to perceive, to learn by hearing, to listen to attentively. And we have to, in order to come into unity with Yahweh, okay, because we see here in Genesis chapter 4 where Yahweh gave the warning to Cain. This wasn't just a warning for Cain. Cain wasn't the only one that had this desire to sin. Okay, he wasn't the only one brought with the carnal mind, raised up with this carnal mind to overcome. It's within all of mankind. This same desire to sin is within all of us. Each and every one of us. At one time, we used to feed this desire to sin when we were of the world. Yahweh has called us out of those things. He's called us here to learn by hearing. As the great priest had spoke about during the feast, in the world today, you have the Jesus virus. Okay? And I like to look at the Jesus virus. It causes damage to the mind. It's called Christianization of the mind, where your mind becomes so Christian-like that Yahweh's way seems too hard to do. And surely there's an excuse of why I can't go Yahweh's way, why I can't be in unity with Yahweh. The great priest on the workshops, praise Yahweh for the Sabbath workshops. Yahweh willing, we're being diligent to attend these things. The great priest brought out several weeks ago in one of the workshops that when we come to Yahweh's house, which we should be coming here at a minimum of every seventh-day Sabbath, okay, the weekly Sabbath day, when we come to Yahweh's house at these eternal appointments, we have to close off our own thinking, our own thoughts, because when pastor's up here speaking, when he starts off with the dinner menu, we could start running in our own minds and we'll miss the next 60 minutes of knowledge that comes forth. But we have to shut off our own thinking, our own thoughts, and not allow our brains to run off ahead of pastor. We have to just sit and listen listen attentively. It says here the definition of hear, to listen attentively to the words that he brings forth. To note these things into our minds, to write them down on paper, to help us remember them. That way, when we go about throughout the week, these things which we heard on the Sabbath, this golden oil that's being poured forth, the instructions for salvation that's given to us will be stuck within our minds throughout every action and choice that we take throughout the day. And then every thought, every feeling, and every action will only be according to Yahweh's laws, because we're going to have this knowledge dwelling within our minds. So we have to be diligent to hear the words that comes forth from Yahweh when Yisrayl Hawkins teaches us. We can't allow our minds to start running off with the great dinner menu that was presented, and then we miss the rest of it. Pastor even says, "No, don't get distracted now. Let's go ahead and stay focused here." As he was saying back in 1990, and this wasn't the first time he said it in this fourth book of Yisrayl. He said it back earlier too, but he said, "Everyone pay attention to me. Look up here at me. Listen, read the words that come from my mouth. Listen attentively to what I'm saying to you." Now also within this positive law number 2, it says, "Submit to Yahweh as the supreme head to be in unity with Yahweh." The word submit is Hebrew word 7511. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance means to humble yourself. Humble. Okay, so we see, I think we've covered some of that before, and surely there's many sermons and tapes that we should be able to refer back to in our minds. The humility that Yahweh requires from His servants. Yahweh did not call us to His house because we're oh so great a person. We're oh so wise a person, oh so knowledgeable. No, He called us to His house to be taught, to have an opportunity to be a part of this great kingdom, but we have to submit to Yahweh by humbling ourselves to His appointed teacher. If you go over to Deuteronomy chapter 8, in Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 2, "You must remember that Yahweh your Father led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness." This wasn't just to the children of Israel who were coming out of Egypt, the ones who were being led out of Egypt by Moshe. These writings are nothing different than what Yahweh has given the instructions to ourselves. "You must remember that Yahweh your Father led you all the way to test and prove you in order to humble you and know what was in your heart, to see whether you would keep His laws or whether you would not. So He humbled you and allowed you to hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know of, nor did your fathers know, so He might make you to know that man does not live by bread only, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh does man live." And this is what Pastor brings forth daily, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through the teachings, through all the writings that he has, is he's bringing forth the every words of Yahweh to us, so that we have the exact guidelines and layout of how to live our life, so that we can be found fit. So when our books are opened on that day of judgment, we're found fit to enter into the kingdom. We know many won't be able to enter into that kingdom. As the scripture says, 3 out of 4 will fall away, because they'll reject the teachings that come forth from Yahweh. They'll reject Yahweh's chosen servant. Go over to Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 5. Not only did Yahweh say He's going to test and prove you, but He shows where this testing and proving would take place. Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse 5 through 8. "But you are to seek the habitation of your father," which all of us did at one time. If we're young, maybe our parents did. But everyone in Yahweh's house, everyone called out of the world, was seeking, where is salvation? Where is salvation being offered? I read these scriptures and I see these things, but no one is teaching these things. "But you are to seek the habitation of your father, the house of Yahweh, the place which Yahweh your Father shall choose out of all your tribes to establish His name, and there you must go." No, it wasn't Jacob Hawkins and Yisrayl Hawkins that just chose to call this place the house of Yahweh. Yahweh inspired them. Yahweh chose to establish His name through those 2 witnesses here in these last days. Just as the prophets foretold thousands of years before there was ever a Hawkins in this land, and now known as America. "There you must bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts that you have vowed to give, your freewill offerings and the firstborn of your herds and your flocks. There in front of Yahweh you and your family shall eat, and you shall rejoice in all," and remember here where it says you shall eat. Remember Matthew chapter 4 verse 4, that man does not live by bread only, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh does man live. Yes, it's an enjoyable thing to partake of the physical food, but without the spiritual food, if it wasn't for the spiritual food being taught at this house, then it would be no different than any other religion out in the world. They take you to a nice steak restaurant or whatever for a Sunday Lord's lunch, eat that blood meat. But if it wasn't for Yahweh's priest who teaches peace, Yisrayl Hawkins, being here teaching Yahweh's laws, okay, we wouldn't be able to eat both the physical and spiritual foods. And you shall rejoice in all that you have put your hand to do, because Yahweh your Father has blessed you. You must not do at all as we're doing here this day, or do at all as the world is doing this day. Look at the news. What is the guideline for mankind today? What is their instruction manual? What are they living for? Well, it says it right here perfectly. Every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes. And that's what we see in the world today. Everyone does whatever is right in their own eyes. Whatever feels good, as they say. Whatever brings that good joy, that's what they want to do. And we must not be like this. Yahweh didn't call us here so we could do what feels good in our own eyes. He called us here to be humbled, tested, and proven, and to be given the instructions to life to be able to come into unity with Yahweh. Because not just anyone can come into unity with Yahweh. You see, the law says there, submit to Yahweh as the supreme head to be in unity with Yahweh. So without humbling yourself, without submitting yourself to Yahweh, you can't come into unity with Yahweh. And the only person authorized, ordained, chosen to teach how to be able to come into unity with Yahweh, showing you how to submit to Yahweh, the one that you can submit yourself to as to submit to Yahweh is Yisrayl Hawkins in these last days, who is only at the House of Yahweh. Pastor's not he's not in it for the money or something, or he'd be, taking the highest bids and doing as you see these retired presidents do and these great scholars of the world, where, you put your name out there for a bid and then you go off to this church one week and the next church the other week and this university, and you sell all these great words that sound so good to people so they can make money for their churches. No, pastors always, since the establishment of Yahweh's house, stood on the laws and the prophecies. As the prophet Isaiah said, if they speak not according to the laws and the prophets, is because there is no light in them. When there is no light in any preacher in the world today, there's none. Only here at Yahweh's house, where we have the opportunity to learn from the priest who teaches peace, are we offered this light. If you will, praise Yahweh. If you will be turning over here, go on to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 9 through 11. Because in that law commentary, the pastor was asking the question, well, where do you go? Where do you go? You have to go to the house of Yahweh. And then who, when you go to the house of Yahweh, I mean, you just park in the parking lot, and salvation is going to enter your vehicle and you're going to be made holy and perfect, and you're going to be enter into the kingdom. No, you have to go to Yahweh's house. And then we see here in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 9 through 11, that you are to go to the priest, who are the Levites, and the judge who is in office at the time, and ask for the decision. I like how Pastor put it that one time. You ask for the decision by coming to Yahweh's house. It's not specifically that you go up to Pastor and you ask him a question. No, you come here to learn, and the decisions come forth constantly from Yahweh's house. The decisions given according to the sentence of judgment, and you must act according to the sentence they pronounce for you at the place Yahweh chooses. Be careful to do all they order you to do. Okay? And not only being careful to do all that's ordered to do at Yahweh's house, not only does it bring the outward example, or the outward appearance, because if you're a family and you come to Yahweh's house, you all learn together, and then if you go home and you don't follow the teachings that come forth, imagine if you're a parent, what you're putting in your child's mind. You want your child to obey you, okay? You're telling them, now don't touch that, Johnny. Stay off of the wood stove. It's going to burn you. I know it's summertime, but in the wintertime, it's going to burn you real bad. And you want that child to listen to you. But then, Pastor said it once, you go and you'll talk down the priest. You talk down pastor, talk down the work. It's the most detrimental thing that you could do to a child in speaking against Yahweh's work. Because children are very bright. They're very smart and intelligent, and they hear the words that come forth from Yahweh at the same time we do. So you go home, you might be doing something. Daddy, are we supposed to be doing that? Or Mommy, are we supposed to be doing that? Didn't Pastor say we weren't supposed to? And then, how do we respond? We respond as we should respond. I appreciate you pointing that out to me. You're correct. That's exactly what Pastor said. Or, well, we just have to do that when we're up at the sanctuary. don't damage your child's mind and ruin them. Because that's what occurs when people turn from Yahweh's house, when they turn from the laws and the prophecies that are brought forth from Yahweh's house. They ruin any opportunity that child has at obtaining salvation here on this earth, because they damage their mind by teaching them this mixture. Just as the world today does, well, don't lie to me, boy. And then, it's December 25th. The fat man's going to come down the chimney. Hurry and get to bed so he brings your gifts. Don't lie to your children. Don't deceive them by not standing up for the priest who teaches peace. And then don't lie to yourself, as the great priest brought the sermon about, do not deceive yourself. Don't in your own mind think, well, I know pastor said I wasn't supposed to do that. Or I know he said I was supposed to take that every day. But, pastor, he brought out just a couple weeks ago, are you going to make an excuse for why you don't keep Yahweh's laws? Well, I didn't have this or I didn't have that. If you allow your mind to make excuses, because Pastor, he said this years ago, don't make excuses. When you confess your sins, take full responsibility for them, okay? For the stupidity and the wickedness that we committed, and don't make excuses. Well, I didn't do this. I broke the speed limit because I was in a rush and I had to get to the sanctuary because it was almost 9:30 and I was running behind. Don't make excuses for doing things that we ought not to be doing. Make excuses. Make sure we set in our mind to make excuses that we have to follow every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yisrayl Hawkins. Praise Yahweh. If you will, go over here to Romans chapter 16. Here in closing, the great apostle Shaul wrote a great warning, because believe it or not, tomorrow when the sun sets today, the first day of the week will begin. Some have to go back out into the world, deal with those in the world, or you may have to even go back to your jobs or whatever it might be. And believe it or not, the whole world is not following the ways of Yisrayl Hawkins at this time. They mock and they ridicule the only person, the priest who teaches peace, who can bring them life eternally. They're not in unity with Yahweh's house and with Yisrayl Hawkins. And in Romans 16, verses 17 through 20, the great apostle Shaul said, on page 886 of your book of Yahweh, he said, "Now I urge you, brethren, to watch out for those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to the teaching which you have learned, and avoid them. For those are such who do not serve our King Yeshua Messiah, but their own belly, and by such smooth words and flattering speech deceive the minds of the simple. For your obedience has become known to all." The world knows that the house of Yahweh is in unity with Yahweh. And those whom Yahweh has called out of this world are coming into unity with Yahweh. And that Yisrayl Hawkins is 100% submitting to Yahweh as his supreme head and is in unity with him, and teaching all who would come and submit themselves to learn at his feet how to do the exact same thing. For your obedience has become known to all, therefore I am glad on your behalf, but I want you to be wise in what is righteous and simple concerning evil, and the Father of peace will crush Satan under your feet shortly. The mercy of our King Yeshua Messiah be with you. And praise Yahweh, brethren, for this awesome opportunity to be able to learn here at Yahweh's house from Yahweh's great priest who teaches peace. If you will all please stand. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the great Kohan, Zephaniah Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Please be seated. We've got 3 prophetic news stories this morning, and the first one is really interesting for those who are studying body language. You may have a textbook on it. It's one of the last pages, but it's the body language that you see when 2 world leaders are about to start a nuclear war. And this is the 2 horns of the altar of death, Putin and Obama, and the body language is the story. And in fact, that's what they talk about in the news. It says these 2 leaders barely looked at each other, and there's more to it than that. And the next story is China condemning USA for pressuring it to join an embargo against Iranian oil. And this is because all the other countries, the big customers of Iran, have made deals with the USA as that they can still continue to buy the oil, but China hasn't. And this is just one of these situations where the people who write these sanctions don't really anticipate all the possibilities. And in this situation, you end up with one big country who's kind of singled out, and this alone can cause nuclear war. And China talks about this. And then the last one is a story of how hospital visits for children with high blood pressure has nearly doubled, and they say over the last 10 years. But the last 10 years are between 1997 and 2006. But this is a subtle attack on self-control. What they're really attacking here is sugar. But they want to make it look like they care about children getting high blood pressure, but they're blaming obesity. But what the real problem is, and if the guy was an expert and he was on this show, if we were one of their guests, we could say, well, Scott, what's really causing this is our television shows. That's what's actually causing this raise and increase in high blood pressure. But they're going to blame sugar subtly, and they want to tax it, and they want to get rid of sugar because it actually gives the people the ability to control themselves. So let's play the video.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome back to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yahweh's last day's witness, Yisrayl Hawkins. 3 interesting articles to talk about this week. The first being some very cold body language shown by 2 of the top world leaders. Katan, these 2 were hardly able to make eye contact.
Jeff, if there was any love or unity in working problems out between these 2 leaders, it surely seemed like it grew cold at this interview. In fact, in Los Cabos, Mexico, 2 of the world's most powerful leaders, U.S. President Barack Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin, members of the quartet, met at a G20 summit. Now, this was their first meeting since Mr. Putin returned to the Russian presidency last month. CBS's Nora O'Donnell stated their meeting lasted 2 hours because they were talking about Syria and didn't want to stop talking about Syria. The concern on everyone's mind is, did these 2 leaders reach a common ground on the Syrian issue? Well, that, Jeff, was a little bit harder to discern.
At a press conference after the meeting, the 2 leaders barely even looked at each other. President Obama stated from their meeting on Syria, "We agree that we need to see a cessation of violence, that a political process has to be created to prevent civil war and the kind of horrific deaths that we've seen over the last several weeks." Now, despite those statements on what they agreed upon, their body language told a different story on how divided they still are on the topic of Syria.
Under former Russian President Medvedev, U.S. and Russia relations had become more friendly. But Russia's support of the Assad regime has caused a rift. The Syrian port city of Tartus is home to Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean. Now, according to CBS, 2 Russian ships are in the Black Sea and are loading what is believed to be arms and ammunition in an attempt to secure that base. There is also reports of a 3rd ship carrying Mi-25 attack helicopters is already on its way to Syria. The Obama administration has said the window is closing for Assad to relinquish power and that Russia can still play a constructive role. It has yet to be seen if these 2 leaders can come up with and agree on a plan that will actually end the violence.
Now, recently the U.S. announced India, South Korea, Turkey, Taiwan, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia had been added to a list of nations that have agreed to cut purchases of Iranian crude in return for exemption from sanctions. This leaves China as Iran's final big customer. While the United States government is putting the pressure on any country that would still purchase high volumes of oil from Iran, China is vocalizing its condemnation of this embargo and standing firm on its position not to join.
Foreign Ministry spokesman Liu Weimin spoke to reporters the day after the U.S. made its announcement, saying China has consistently opposed one country using its own laws to impose unilateral sanctions on another country, and using those sanctions on a third country is even more unacceptable. We think China's trade with Iran is totally legal and reasonable. We have already explained our position very clearly to the U.S.
The new sanctions law was passed by the U.S. government at the end of 2011 and is scheduled to go into effect at the end of June 2012. Until now, any country not reducing its oil purchases from Iran has been warned that if they continue to do oil business with Iran after June, it could lead to banking penalties from the U.S. America's goal in significantly hurting Iran's oil trade is to force Iran to stop working on its nuclear program, which the U.S. believes is to develop nuclear weapons. But we know that Iran insists and has always insisted the program is strictly for civilian and peaceful purposes.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier this year, China did reduce its imports of oil from Iran. However, this was due to a pricing dispute and not the Chinese government leaning toward joining the U.S.'s position. It is believed that at the rate China has been recently importing crude from Iran, they will soon meet or exceed past levels purchased.
In an interview with Press TV, Wu Bingbing, a spokesman for Peking University, further explains how China and Iran are going to remain close. He states, "I have to emphasize that oil is not everything there is to China and Iran's relations. You cannot take a few months' trade figures and use them as a barometer of bilateral relations to conclude that China is responding to American pressure by submitting to its demands. This doesn't take into account the long-term or strategic aspects to our relationship."
While China values its friendship with the U.S., experts say it also supports an independent Iran without American influence in the Middle East and Central Asia. Last week, Russia, China, and the 4 Central Asian countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization declared their unanimous opposition to the United States' unilateral sanctions and outside military actions against both Iran and Syria. In other words, they're in agreement to disagree with the United States.
Exactly. Well, from hurt not the oil to hurt not our lifestyle. Katan, this last article deals with just one problem we see from the lifestyle chosen by so many today that is now affecting children. YPN's Larry McGee is looking into this report on hypertension. Larry, I thought high blood pressure was just an adult problem.
Sadly, that is no longer the case, Jeff. And in fact, a new study released just this week reports that over the last decade, hospital visits for children with high blood pressure has almost doubled to over 24,000 per year. And as an example, 14-year-old Kyle Munchler has been hospitalized 4 times for high blood pressure. And as a result, he has been prescribed 4 medications. And his mother, Lynette, closely monitors everything he consumes. In Kyle's own words, it is definitely a much different lifestyle than what the average person lives. He has to maintain a certain diet, exercise regularly, and monitor his blood pressure very carefully. The study, released this week, examined a number of children like Kyle who've been hospitalized for high blood pressure. The increase in cases has also produced a 50% rise in treatment costs, totaling over $3 billion. Dr. Rick Caskell of Montefiore Hospital, who is a pediatric kidney specialist, conveys that 70% of his new patients have high blood pressure. To quote, Dr. Caskell says, "We have all seen it. We've seen it associated with the marked increase in obesity, but not to these numbers." And he believes that the hospitalization rate is really the most astounding part of this story. At present, many researchers believe obesity to be the major factor, and this in addition to genetics and environment, which are also suspected causes. For children like Kyle, however, the cause has yet to be identified, but by virtue of the increase in technology, Kyle is able to utilize his phone, which contains a specially adapted computer application, to monitor his blood pressure and email the results to his doctor for study. The ultimate concern, however, seems to focus not so much on the present, but the future. According to Dr. Caskell, the elevated blood pressure earlier on is having a deteriorative effect on the children's organs. And by the time they reach adulthood, the damage is done. It may be irreversible and could possibly lead to cardiovascular disease as well. To offer a parting note, Dr. John LePoke reports that over the last generation, we've seen more than a tripling in the rate of childhood obesity. So it is not surprising that we are also seeing surges in conditions believed to be related to obesity, such as high blood pressure and diabetes. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Gatan Jeff, back to you.
Wow, Jeff, that ties right into the prophecy that the Savior said that we would see these pestilences and diseases increasing in this last generation. This is just more solid proof to those who believe that the prophecies written in the Holy Scriptures are 100% accurate without a shadow of a doubt. And Jeff, as we continually bring these articles, it confirms the establishment of the work that Yisrayl Hawkins and the House of Yahweh would do in these last days. Foretell the events concerning the times, and the biding of times, and warning the people of this world to come out from among them. Now, as the world scratches their heads for solutions, and nations bully each other into submission, Yisrayl Hawkins is bringing the peaceful solution from Yahweh, the creator of the universe. So continue to watch as Yisrayl Hawkins foretells Bible prophecies. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thanks for watching.
Everyone please stand. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins! Shalom, everyone! Praise Yahweh!
You may be seated. I lost one of those things, if you could pick it up down there. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Don't think that we're sitting still by any means. I'll get this where I can read it here in a minute. Since August 22nd to June 22nd, 2012, we have reached 78 million new ones, almost 79 million new ones. Yes, million, that's million. Praise Yahweh. My mind don't go that high being an Okie, but I can tell it's big. A lot of people. And it's rising every day. Getting more every day. More calls coming in every day. Last week, the news right here is really great now, because it's really showing everything that the Scriptures, and that's the reason we bring it, everything that the Scripture is showing, the prophecy for this time period. We're seeing it right now on the news. And we're seeing the war-raging nations. They keep building up and getting their ships and planes and everything in place, and of course it won't be long before you're going to see the strikes, and then all the experts say, and according to the Bible, the Scriptures also, the Holy Scriptures, it will spread then to 4/5 of the earth's population being destroyed. Now, last week, if you remember, we started and left off in Isaiah 65, 1 through 7, where it's showing the 12 tribes. And, of course, Yahweh is working with them. And He's letting them go their own way, do their own things. And then He says, I'll show you how this measures up in your bosom. Now, that's where we started. I told you how they became nations, divided by language, by tribes. We got more nations now than ever before, more languages now than ever before in history. Some small, some great. They're still doing the same thing they were in Israel in the days of the kings, where a stronger king takes over the smaller kings and the weaker kings. The peaceful people, they were known for taking over the peaceful people. They didn't want Galilee because the people were unteachable, they said. They insisted on sticking with the original. And of course, I told you about the great study, toxicology. Two dictionaries, one will pronounce it toxology, the other one pronounces it toxicology, so you can take your pick. They can't agree among themselves. One says it's a study of nature, the other says it's a study of toxins, of poisons. Well, of course, they have the study of nature. They're supposed to that's supposed to mean original, but it's not. Nature is what has become popular now. If it's popular, like the words, you know, if you have a popular word, you change it from thee. It was thee, and if it becomes popular to pronounce it the, then you change that, and everybody starts using that word and saying you're wrong for pronouncing it thee anymore. The word ethnic, the first word is heathen. That's where you find it in the nations, the forming of the nation. Ethnic. You've heard of ethnic cleansing a lot here lately. It started with the Crusades. The ethnics, the first word that describes them is heathen. That was the Galileans that they described that way. Yeshua was a heathen. His 12 disciples were heathen. To the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, and I forget the fourth one that came out of the beastly system, but they're all alive and well in Rome today. The ethnic cleansing started. It didn't start with the Crusades. The ethnic cleansing was going on. I guess everybody was asleep who wrote the history books, but it was going on. The Apostle Shaul was the greatest ethnic cleanser there was in that time. He far succeeded all of the other men around him, he said, all of his aid. And he brought them from other cities. Who did they bring? The Galileans, the ones they ran out. The priests ran out of Israel with their persecutions, and they went to other cities throughout the world. He chased them down, brought them back for trial, going to hang them, stone them, or kill them in some way. Later on, they started burning them at the stake because the hanging them on the stake was not enough, so they set them on fire, set wood around them and anything to make it cruel, to where you would not want to own a Bible. Well, this was, of course, their idea. This is what they were trying to do. This is what Daniel spoke of when he said they will fight against Yahweh, they will fight against the saints in order to remove Yahweh's word from the land. Now, if you don't get this, you won't understand what I'm going to bring you in Daniel in the last part of the numbers that no one on earth has ever understood until this time period. So you've got to understand what I'm saying now and let it sink into your mind. Study it. It would be a great understanding to you if you would go over these lessons again and again and again till you have them in your mind to where it becomes permanent to you in your subconscious and your conscious mind. But heathen or ethnic, relating to large groups or religious groups like we are today, having a different language that we use, which we do. Someone was showing me some cards yesterday. They had the name Yahweh and Yeshua and Boaz and Melchizedek and all of these names, and they were pronouncing them. And of course, this was a very young child, I think somewhere around 2 years old. And you could hold up a card and they'd announce it just like that. And I said, you know, this is really amazing. Do you know how many people in the whole world, could look at those names and pronounce them? How many people? But nevertheless, how many children? But how many people? And a 2-year-old child. Yes, we have our language is quite different from the world. Well, the nations were formed by the 12 tribes. The other people that was out there were interbred into the 12 tribes, and we've all become one lump of witch's brew now in the last days. The concoction that the witches themselves brewed up for mankind in order to bring him down. And that's what toxology is about. Toxicology, that's what it's about. They're supposed to study the original, and then they're supposed to see the poison that changed it from the original. That is their work. That's what they were created to do. And then they are supposed to file lawsuits against those, I guess, this is the way it goes anyway, but they're supposed to file lawsuits against those corporations that's got money that created this poison to form something or take it away from its originality. That's their jobs. And of course, now nature is something they accept. And nature is far from original. And what nature is what the FDA says is okay. And according to the FDA, you can drink so much blood, you can put so much poison in your meats and your chicken and your beef. That's nature. Now, if you take away from what the FDA allows, then you've created a poison that toxicology is supposed to locate, file charges, get it reversed down to nature again. But the nature today is far different from the natural man and woman that was created on earth and everything that was made for him to be created. I want you to turn over to Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23. And I like that deal that one of my sons brought this morning about the automobiles. I know you got that about the Model Ts and the Model As, and his father's my son too, but he's my son also. He did a great job on that. Most people think cars have been around forever, television sets, computers, and he kind of reinforced it there this morning that they have not been around forever. And before that, we were driving wagons and teams. And I know some of the unlearned and ignorant wicked people who can't understand. Now, I know that they're not going to believe me. They're going to say, oh, no, that car, Moses was driving one of them, and then he drove a steamboat across the river and knocked up big waves, and it went all out there, and the bottom dried out where they went through with this big old boat of his, and all the Israelis run across it right quick. That stream must have been about 40 foot wide when he hit it with that boat. Well, don't worry about it. None of the wicked are going to understand at this time. That's a fact. You can mark that down as fact. But the illegal lust and uncleanness is what started this whole thing. Illegal lust and uncleanness. You know, you can be anything you want to be. And you need to set this in your mind. You're too fat, you can lose weight with the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program if you will use it the way it is written. You're having difficulties in other fields, smoking, drinking. You know, drinking is a very, very bad thing that we get ourselves into, alcohol. It's spoken of often in the Scriptures. you can quit it. You can overcome it by practicing the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. It won't work unless you use it. You know, you can have it. You can buy all the books, stack them up, as we used to. There used to be a song, you know, about the Scriptures, and get the dust off the Bible. Well, of course, I remember that song from years ago. Well, you can stack these Peaceful Solution books on your library shelf and let them draw dust, or you can read them and apply them to your life, and you can make anything out of your life. If you're a sodomite, you can change your life from being a sodomite to an original like Yahweh created. Yes, you can do that with the Peaceful Solution if you will use it. You can adjust your life from pushing buttons to reading and learning to love reading and learning. You can't overfill your mind. This is something that I don't worry about because I had an empty mind. I was born in Oklahoma. So if I worked for 200 years, I'd never fill my mind. Well, nobody can, in fact. You can't overfill your subconscious mind. You can't overfill your conscious mind. It becomes better with use. It's the only thing on earth that I know of that actually becomes better. The more you use it, the better it gets. It's not like the computers we get, and I hear people scream and they curse the thing, you know, because it played out on them, or it's too slow. and of course that subconscious mind, we're going to have that one day. Yahweh is going to give it to us if we qualify. You can see how the world failed when Yahweh increased the knowledge. He increased the knowledge. That's why we have automobiles, of course. That's why they were made in this generation. Yahweh give us a little bit of knowledge, just a little bit, called a computer. And of course, with that computer, you can store knowledge, tons of knowledge, not as much as you can store in your subconscious mind. Maybe 1/1000th as much. That won't get near it either. There is no way of overfilling your mind. You don't have to go and buy extra boots for it or whatever you call them things where you got extra memory. It just enlarges, and it doesn't have to get bigger to enlarge. Now take that. How do you explain that? It never gets full. It just gets better and more and more. Now that is what Yahweh wants to give us. What if He had given these same people 100 years ago the use of their subconscious mind? What did they do with the computers? You see that? They take the little bit of knowledge that Yahweh has given them, and what do they do with it? The first thing they do is military. That's the first place it goes to, military. So they can kill and destroy. Military. Right now, if I had my way, right now, all the computers in the world would be teaching nothing but the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. And we would get everybody in the world to seeking the kingdom of heaven first, and then all this other will be added. Want gold? You could create it if you had the use of your subconscious mind without any problem. You could create all the gold you wanted, all the silver you want. You could have you could make a planet, your own planet, out of gold if you wanted to. I don't think it'd be worth living on, but be worthless. A lot of the things that we put big prices on right now is going to be worthless in the future because it's going to be abundant. You can create it yourself. You can just demand that it forms. Just give it a commandment. The things that form it, and it'll be there waiting on you. in abundance. You can create mountains of it if you want to, and watch it glitter. Well, that's what we're going to be given if we seek the kingdom of heaven first. If we seek gold first, we'll go to our grave and maybe even hell with our gold. And if we seek sodomy and don't try to overcome it, we're going to go to hell. We're going to be cast into the lake of fire along with the thoughts in our mind that we've craved, the wicked lust that we've craved. If we seek alcohol and we continue to let it ruin our lives, yes, you'll burn in hell. You're going to be cast in. You're being judged right now for what you're doing. You are being judged to see whether you're fit to handle knowledge or not. Big knowledge, big time knowledge. You can't imagine how much wisdom and knowledge you're going to have. Increased knowledge. He just gave us a little bitty speck there with the computers. Little computers, they won't do anything. When you compare them to the subconscious mind, there is no comparison at all. And that is what you're going to have, and you can have anything you want with that subconscious mind. What I want and what I hope you're going to start desiring, every one of you, I hope to learn everything that Yahweh knows, of course. Yes, that's the number one thing. And then I hope to use everything that He knows, everything that He gives me, to the use of teaching and guiding and keeping to its originality what Yahweh created, because He created it all perfectly. And we'll find out what that perfection was, and we can bring everything back. We're going to renew it and bring everything back to its perfection, and we'll have the power to do so. Well, in Jeremiah now, at 23, Jeremiah 23, if you look at verses 1 and 2 and believe it, he says, woe to the pastors. He's talking, of course, to the priests of Israel. These were called elders in Samuel's day. They were called Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes in the days of Yeshua. They're called Catholics today. They're the same four religions that Daniel spoke of, Isaiah spoke of, Yekishka spoke of, Samuel spoke of it. In fact, if you'll look back to Samuel 7, you'll see, 1 Samuel 7, you'll see that Easter was being celebrated. Well, where did Easter come from? From the 7 hills of Rome. They had to permit it. The popes had to permit it, or it wouldn't be in the world. If they'd have condemned it like they did the Bible and burn all the books like they did the Bible and forbid that anyone own one and kill trillions of people who were trying to own a scripture, who wanted to own a scripture. If it hadn't have been for a rising up, well, what caused the rising up now in the Catholic Church? What caused this to take place? Well, of course, there was a reason, and it came from Yahweh, and it was used several times, and I'll show you that very soon. But understand this. The pastors who destroy and scatter, by this, the people who was trying to follow Samuel, who had any form of righteousness, who had any form of holiness that was written by the prophets, they persecuted them. Which of the prophets have your people not persecuted? Your fathers not persecuted? This is what they were talking about. Yes, they persecuted them. They threatened Jeremiah. They told him, you prophesy anymore in the name of Yahweh and we'll kill you. They meant it. They killed thousands and thousands of people. What we saw in the Crusades was not the beginning of it. And it's still going today even. They're still persecuting people who want to use the name Yahweh or keep Yahweh's feast or have any form of holiness. Therefore, this is what Yahweh says. The father of Israel says, against the pastors who feed my people, you who scatter my flock and have driven them away, Driving them away where? You remember Yeshua when he set his 12 disciples out, he said, don't go to any of the heathen, just go to these that are scattered, these lost 10 tribes that they drove out of Israel, out of the land of Israel. Behold, I am going to visit, attend to you for the evil of your doing, says Yahweh. Well, he didn't mean he's going to take them and whip them. He's going to let them go their own way and teach them a lesson. And then they will be resurrected, of course, at the end of the 1,000-year period. Look on down to verse 10. We'll skip some of this and come back to it in the middle, but we're on the subject of scattering Yahweh's people, scattering them throughout the world, including what is now called the United States. That was what this came to be right here. That wasn't the beginning of it. Hitler wasn't the beginning of it. Hitler was actually the middle part of it in trying to kill. Hitler was a Jew. Don't let anyone tell you differently. He was a Jew. All the people in Germany were Jews. It was the Pharisaic Jews in Germany, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes in Germany, that wanted to destroy the Galileans in Germany. There wasn't any difference. You couldn't tell the difference in them. They even had to make them wear arm tags so they could see the difference in them. They were the same people. They were all the same people that were there in Germany. German Jews and Jewish Jews, if you want to call them that. Well, verse 10 now, for the land is full of adulterers. Now, this is why they killed Yochanan, if you remember. Remember, he came and said, it's not right that you should have your brother's wife. Well, who was he speaking to? One of the kings of Israel. Oh, he must have been a foreigner or something. No, he was an Israelite. He was a king of Israel. He was an Israelite, one of the 12 tribes. And Yochanan said to him, it's not right that you should have your brother's wife. Yochanan was standing up for the law. So what did they do to solve the problem? They cut off his head. That stopped his tongue. That solved their problem, right? No, it made their problems worse. Yochanan will have his reward, but they won't. Their reward is going to come after they prove themselves after the millennium. For the land is full of adulterers, those who turn from following Yahweh. This is what the Apostle Kepha said. It had been far better if you hadn't even known the laws of Yahweh than to have known these precious laws, let them sit on the bookshelf and get dust all over them, and then regret you ever paid that much money for them, and wish you had the money back so you could go buy another beer or two, or another drop of wine or alcohol. Is it become that bad? Have you got that low to where you're going to have to kick yourself off of the hill to get up out of the sludge you're in? That's like walking around in the pink slime. Well, I just can't stop eating this meat out here in the world. Yeah, you can. You can do without meat. We did. I did. I certainly did. Let's see. Because of this, the curse... Because of the adulterers, those who turned against Yahweh, because of this curse, the land mourns. Well, it's mourning more today than it was back then. There's any number of scriptures, and maybe we can show some next week. That'd be a great idea to show some videos showing how defiled the land is, because you can see the worms and the parasites moving alive if you will magnify it enough. Now, these are poisons that's been created by mankind. Toxicology is the study that they invented to try to save them from their own evil doings. But these are the things they created in their own bodies and in the labs, in the laboratories. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up. That is, they have no life left in them. Their conduct is evil. They have no understanding. None of the wicked will understand. How do you break this? Repent. Repent. Humble yourself and repent. You're having a argument with your wife. This is a great example. Y'all got a fight going? Which one of you is big enough, is strong enough to let go of it? You got a fight going with your brother? Which one of you is strong enough and can prove to Yahweh that you can stop it right then and there? That's what the apostles told you to do. Yeshua said, if you can't, well, chop it off and throw it away. Get it from you. It's better to do without it than to burn with it in hell. Because that's what you're going to do if you don't start using the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. It's there for you, but if you don't use it, if you don't keep the Sabbath, it won't benefit you. If you'll keep the Sabbath, Yahweh will keep His appointment with you, and you'll start learning. Yes, that's the way it works at His house. Well, verse 11 says, for both prophet and priest are profane. This is not the prophets of Yahweh like Jeremiah that He sent to warn them, Isaiah, Yekishka, and so forth. These are the prophets who had control, the prophets and priests who had control of the so-called temple. You know, the temple, Yahweh allowed it to be destroyed 3 times. He allowed it to be destroyed and rebuilt. He had to have it rebuilt so Yeshua could come and let them kill him, because it was his house that had to pronounce the death sentence upon him, showing that they rejected him. So he allowed this to take place twice, and they still didn't get the lesson. They're still too stupid to get the lesson from Yahweh. So He allowed it again. And then He said, it's going to be destroyed, going to be plowed like a field. And then I'm going to scatter all of you. I'm going to let you go out into the world, all of you, clear to the ends of the earth. And you're going to take this same poison, and then you're going to be creating toxicology lessons in your schools of higher learning to try to find out what you did to cause it. When the prophets already told you what you did to cause it, but you won't take their word. For both prophet and priest are profane. Profane, if you look that word up, they're just living by illegal lust and eating unclean animals. That's what started it. That's what started it. All of that led to sodomy. It wasn't there to begin with. The mind has to become poisoned before a person will turn to those things, either poisoned or untaught. And the only reason that the people remain in the Catholic Church today is because they were without the Holy Scriptures for thousands of years, and now that they've got it, they're afraid to read it, and even they'll be reading the Bible and they'll see that it disagrees with what they're living by today. They're afraid to open their mouth, and if they open their mouth, the priest jump down their throat about it. And if they're not there to receive their lard wafer on Sunday, they go hunting them. If they don't pay their tithe to the Catholic Church, they go hunting them. They're held under and won't turn them loose, as Isaiah 14 said. They're held prisoners. Held prisoners. They're raped, they're beaten, they're molested, all of them. And they're in fear of moving. That's how bad it got in these crusades and before the crusade. They were fearful for their lives. For both prophet and priest are profane. Yes, even in my own house now, in my own house, I have found their wickedness, says Yahweh. And so their way will be slippery. This is how it's going to be, slippery places to them in the darkness, without understanding, in other words. This is not talking about turning off a light. It's talking about turning off the light of knowledge. the light of knowledge and understanding. None of the wicked will understand. And unless they repent, they will never have that understanding. They will be driven on and fall in the darkness for the corrected there, for the way they have chosen brings trouble upon them. The year of their visitation, this is the same wording that he says the sins of the heathen are not complete. Heathen was not the Galileans who kept Yahweh's laws. The heathen are the Catholics and everyone that follows that rebellious attitude. That's what Yahweh and the prophets describe as the heathen. The way of the heathen. I have seen folly, offense in the prophets of Samaria also. They prophesied in the name of the rabbis, in the title of the rabbis. What is that? Lord, Lord, Lord. Same word, Lord and Lord. That's where the word Lord comes from. It comes from the word lard, L-A-R-D. I didn't make that up. It's in the dictionaries. I have seen folly in the prophets of Samaria. They prophesied in the name of the Lord and caused my people Israel to err, go astray. I have also seen in the prophets of Jerusalem horrible things. They commit adultery. They walk in lies. They also strengthen the hands of the evildoers so that none of them turns back from their wickedness. All of them are like Sodom and Gomorrah. So here we see sodomites, sodomy in Jerusalem, even in the temple. Therefore, this is what Yahweh of hosts says concerning these prophets. Behold, I will feed them with wormwood and make them drink, or allow them to drink, the water of gall. For from the prophets of Jerusalem, get this now, from the prophets of Jerusalem. Who were the prophets of Jerusalem? The Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. And one more religion, it'll come to me later, has gone out into the land, gone out into the world. That word land there, translated land, it's 776 and means world or earth, where there is activity, where there's activity of the people. Look on down to verse 21. Verse 21, he says, I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken of them, yet they prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel and caused my people to hear my words. Now, it's apparent from this that they did not stand in his counsel. They didn't teach his words. They're teaching something else besides his words. Well, what is being taught in the world today? It's traditions. Traditions of the elders. Traditions of the elders of Israel, who is spoken of as early as Cain. All the world has gone the way of Cain. It's seen in 1 Samuel 7, where they were celebrating Easter. Yes, as early as 1 Samuel 7, also in Jeremiah 44, celebrating baking hot cross buns to the Queen of Heaven. Yes, Easter, Jeremiah, Jeremiah 10, first 10 verses, Christmas. These are some of the traditions that they're following. Who follows those today? Also, in Isaiah, we see that they kept memorials to the dead. That's Halloween. Halloween is the biggest holiday in the world now, even tops Christmas. Yes, I lost my family because of Halloween. They couldn't stand not trick-or-treating. They had to go to their family and trick-or-treat and never came back. My people to hear my words, if they would have caused my people to hear my words, then they would have turned them from the evil way and from the evil of their doing. Now that's the promise. Look on down to verse 26. How long is this lie going to be in the hearts of the prophets that prophesy these lies? The lies, speaking in the name of Baal, causing profaneness to go out to the land, traditions to go out to the land, deceit in their own minds, as verse 26 says, who devise, plan, and scheme to cause my people to forget my name for Lord, for the title of the rabbis, as Unger shows. That's where the word Lord comes from. It was a title they gave to themselves. The dead rabbis that they worship on Halloween, All Saints' Day, they call it. Should we make this Pope a saint? Well, if his enough miracles take place, we'll make him a saint. And he can't make him a saint after he's dead because he's got to repent. That's part of it. Okay, now, I deliberately skipped part of this, but if you'll go back, you'll see that Yahweh, in verse 20, you'll see that Yahweh has a plan. And he brings it right across with this. So he shows that this is in the last days now that we're speaking of, where profaneness has gone out to all the earth, the whole earth. And verse 20, he says, verse 20 of chapter 23, he says, the judgment of Yahweh will not return until he has executed and performed the thoughts, that is, the plan, his plan of his heart. In the latter days, you will understand it perfectly. How would you understand it perfectly in the last days? In the latter days? Because it'll be taught. If you can think about now what Shaul, the apostle Shaul, he wasn't an apostle at that time because Yahshua met him and told him to repent, which he did, and then he started using him. He knew the laws. He knew the traditions of the elders, that is. He knew them well, and he was enforcing those traditions. We see those traditions throughout the prophet's writing. The prophets spoke against them. Every one of the prophets spoke against these traditions that we're celebrating today. Easter, Christmas, Halloween, all of these things, they spoke against them. And they were persecuted for doing so. But the prophets of Yahweh had a lot of followers in Israel. In fact, there were more of them, I think, than there was the others, because if you remember, the king was afraid to deal with Yochanan because the people knew that he was a prophet. They said no, they're afraid to because of the uprising. And there would have been a large uprising, but of course he did this secretly. At that time, you could kill a person, and it didn't travel on television instantly to where you'd see that the king cut off Yochanan's head. It would travel by the word of mouth, and it didn't travel far, so it didn't get to too many people. It was scattered. Just scattered gossip is about all it amounted to. But if it scattered rapidly all at once and was well known and it went to everyone publicly, then there was an uprising. If it didn't, it didn't amount to much. And this is the way they did with Yochanan. They kept him in prison for quite a while, and then secretly they cut off his head, secretly, and served it to the wicked queen. I wonder if she ate it. I just wonder if she did. I wouldn't put it past her. That's what Christianity has turned to today. You see them eating people, people eating people. This is what eating lard gets you. Yes. Toxicology knows this now. I'll read you an article in just a moment. 23. We're in 23. We just read verse 20. Look on back now to verse 5. Verse 5. Now, in this same time period, see, he's making a prophecy that involves you. He just got through showing the other side of the coin, which is the church that sits on 7 hills, now, and has brought this profaneness to all the earth, yes, all the earth. He's brought it to all the earth. Not one place on earth where it hasn't touched. And here he says now, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch. In the same chapter here, and a king, a branch and a king, will reign and succeed. They will succeed. The branch and the king will succeed. You're a fool if you don't believe that. A branch and a king and will reign and will succeed and will execute judgment. That's the judgments of Yahweh, and justice in the earth. They will execute judgment and justice in the earth. They will prophesy, they will practice it, and then they will teach it to about 2 billion people. We're teaching it now, but not all want it. Most people just look at it and throw it away. But they will remember it one day. In his days, Yada will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. And this is the name that he will proclaim to them. And he shows you Yahweh our righteousness. If you seek, as Yeshua said, seek the kingdom of Yahweh and his righteousness. First, he said, first. Seek that first. And all these others, all this stuff, that the fortunes and things, they will be added to you. You'll have them at your fingertips, at your tongue's tip. All you got to do is command it. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up. Now you got to remember this. I told you that before when I read you this recently. You got to get this word in your mind. Brought up. That's a very important thing to understand. The way Yahweh brought up Moshe, you remember, he sent the 12 tribes, the making of the 12 tribes, to Egypt. And he says, you're going to stay there 400 years. Now this was the bringing up. The way he brought up Yeshua, he said, Zebulun saw the light. It was 558 years later that Yeshua was born, thereabout. And I may be wrong on those dates. It's coming from a long time back memory of dates. But he brought up Yeshua. He brought up Moshe in Egypt. They stayed there 400 and something years. A man was born from that breeding program, and upon him was laid the great job of bringing them out of Egypt. And not by bicycle even, and not by Model T, and not by automobile or boat. But he brought them up. But that wasn't the bringing up. The bringing up in Hebrew is a plan that is practiced, taught, understood, and brought about. That's the plan of Yahweh. And from the end of that bringing up, he had Moshe, whom he had bred and guarded the breeding, and he showed him his laws. He was a very humble, faithful servant in Yahweh's house. And Yahweh, of course, Yahweh does the work. Moshe got the glory. Like I'm getting a lot of glory today, but I'm really not doing this. Yahweh is doing it. He's the one that opened your minds. He's the one that opened your heart. I stand here and teach you a sermon once a week, but unless he makes you absorb it, you could still fall away. And if he chooses you unfit through your actions, well, you will fall away. So work on it. You don't have time to work on it. Overcome now. Who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out of the protected place. Well, leading them out of the protected place was after he brought up. He brought up the activity, the active man that would actually keep his laws, teach his laws, and so forth, his kingdom, to bring these people out of Egypt, out of the protected place. Now, he's talking about now in these last days now. But they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, in these last days, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out of, meaning out of protected place. That's meaning got their training. They got their training out of the protected place. So they grew there. They grew. They got their training. Before that, they got their breeding. Somewhere or another, Yahweh, in your bloodline, somewhere down through the years, Yahweh placed something in your bloodline to ring a bell in your brain and say, get to the house of Yahweh. He did all of that. Out of the protected place, that is training up, protected, training in the protected place. That's the same thing you see now in Revelations 12 about the last day's work, where he brought up the last witness. He set a work going that actually brought up the last witness. This took a little longer, as we'll see, to do in the last days than it did in these generations. In fact, almost doubled the time. Out of the protected place and from the countries where I had driven them. The countries where I had driven them, they will dwell in their own land. Now, if you look at, go back to verse 5, and you see that again. In the days will come, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch that I will raise. Now, this is the same wording as we'll see in Revelations 12. He's going to raise him up. Before I was born, Yahweh planted a seed somewhere. Down through the years, that brought about a man and a woman that actually wanted to study the Scriptures. And they did it every night, and they taught it every night. And from those people, 2 men were born. Boys. 2 children were born. And one of them was named by a 1-year-old brother. Yes, 1 year old. I know that's being disputed, but I know it. I don't know if I told you, but we have several people in the audience right now that was present when my sister-in-law was here. And after Jacob died, she came to visit the house of Yahweh in this building. And I announced that day that my sister-in-law was here. And so after the services, a bunch of women got together with her, and she told them in front of them all, and they remember it. She talked to me, and she asked me, did I get the letter that Jacob sent me concerning my name changed? And she said they were concerned because my 1-year-old brother had named me, had given me that name, and They were concerned about me changing it. And you know, it never even dawned on me till even after that what a miracle this was that a 1-year-old brother could give a person a name. But it occurred. And now we can prove it, but they'll never prove it. None of the wicked will understand, but we understand. But he's going to raise up to David a righteous branch. Notice we're righteous, not that he will be righteous till the end, but raising him up is part of the teaching him and training him to overcome to be righteous. You're not righteous until you practice the laws of Yahweh fully. And that's what we're doing right now. And as I'm raising up, so are you. I'm raising you up with me. That's what makes you my sons and daughters. I know you're older than I am, but you're still my sons and daughters. And a king. And a king. Now, if you'll look over to Zechariah, I'm doing this not so much for your sakes as I'm doing it for everyone in listening to us, because this is going out nationwide. Zechariah 6, and remember what he says, "Behold, the days come." This was written in 598 BCE, by the way. "And the day has come when I will raise to David a righteous branch, and a king will reign." A king will reign, that is Yahshua, will reign and succeed and will execute judgment and justice in the earth. That's Yahshua doing the performing of this with the righteous branch. Now in Zechariah 6, he continues with this, and this was written about 100 years later, maybe 80 years later. Zechariah adds to this in verse 11, chapter 6, verse 11, and he says, "Take the silver and the gold, make crowns, and set them upon the head of Yahshua." Now, the King James Version translated this Joshua, but if you'll look it up, it means Yahshua. And Yazadek set the crown upon the head of Yahshua, son of Yazadek. And if you'll look in the center reference, the Strong's Concordance says this word means Yahweh. So set them upon the head of Yahshua, son of Yahweh. This is my son. This day have I begotten thee. Remember that in the King James Version? When he was baptized and came up, then a voice said, "This is my beloved son. This day have I begotten thee." King James Version, a branch. And he says, set them on the head of Yahshua, son of Yahweh, the high priest. So he crowned him as high priest, as we see in Hebrews, the 10th chapter. We have a high priest over the house of Yahweh. Well, where is the house of Yahweh? It was destroyed in 70 CE. But the days are come. The days are coming, when I will raise up a branch, a righteous branch, to a king, Yahshua, and they will reign. Now look at verse 12. "Speak to him and say, This is what Yahweh of hosts says, Behold the man whose name is the branch, for he will branch out from his place, and he will build the house of Yahweh." So they will he will reign as king, as Hebrews 10 shows, over the house of Yahweh. Yahshua will, with the man whose name is the branch, who establishes the house of Yahweh in the last days. Yes, he will build the house of Yahweh. This branch will build the house of Yahweh. He will branch out and build the house of Yahweh. He will bear glory and will set and rule on his throne. He will be a priest. the branch will be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace will be between them both him and Yeshua. Then, in chapter 1 and verse 2, he says, Yahweh has been, this is Zechariah going to the 12 tribes of Israel, and shows what his birth was. He was a son of a priest. And Yahweh has been exceedingly unpleased with your fathers. And then he says in verse 4, he says, do not be like your fathers, unto whom the former prophets have cried, saying, this is Yahweh of hosts, saying, turn away now from the evil ways, from your evil ways and your evil doings. But they would not listen, nor pay any attention to me, says Yahweh. So Zechariah is showing 100 years later they were still going the same way that Isaiah showed they would go. Now look on down to verse 8. He says, I saw in the night vision now, and behold, a man riding upon a horse. And here's where you see now the activities of the quartet. Zechariah, Yahweh led him right off to start showing the last days' work and the last days' activities of the quartet here. Remember in Revelation 6, he gives you the color of the horses there. Well, the color of the horses give you the activities of the quartet. The quartet. I know my time's up, and I'm trying to figure out where I can stop here to make it fit in. Well, maybe we'll just stop there. If you'll go back to, just remember this, and go back to Isaiah now. You see how the prophets here that they were persecuting. Go back to Isaiah 65. You see the prophets that they were persecuting. They were telling them what they were doing, and then showing how Yahweh was going to bring a work to bring forth his plan. Because he's not going to forego his plan. He's had his plan from the beginning, and his plan is carried through one after another, and he always prophesied that plan. And there's been no other work except what he shows by his prophet. Well, of course, in the last days is the branch that we just got through reading that would actually establish the house of Yahweh. Well, here now back to Isaiah 65. Isaiah 65 and verse 7. He shows the abominations. In verse 4, he shows the memorials to the dead. That is Halloween. They celebrate memorials to the dead. That's Halloween. They started calling it Saints' Day or Saint So-and-so's Day. But then after so many of them died, they had a day for every saint, and they was taken off every day to worship the saints. So they finally changed it and made one day now to celebrate all the saints. So it's called All Saints' Day now. That's Halloween now. But it's still the same abomination. And then you see the swine's flesh taking the lard. Memorials to the dead and the eating of swine. You got to get those two together there, because this brings forth the abominable things, the broth of abominable things. That broth means teaching. It means teaching of abominable things. That is, things that are fantasies, not true, lies, deceit, and so forth. Abominable things. And then in verse 7, he says, I'm going to, your iniquities and iniquities of your fathers, I'm going to let this go, let you go ahead and do it. And then you will see, because I'm going to measure this in your bosom, meaning in your bodies. I'm going to actually measure this and show you what you are doing, what you have done to your bodies. Now that won't be shown to them until they're resurrected, of course, and you're the ones that's going to be showing this to them. I didn't get as far as I wanted to, but we'll pick up here next week, Yahweh willing. But you're the ones that's going to be resurrecting them. As Revelations 20 shows, the resurrection, the first resurrection will be those who qualify for the kingdom, who chose the kingdom of Yahweh first. First, they put it first in their life. You're the ones that will be receiving this power, and you will resurrect those who died before us that chose the kingdom of Yahweh and His righteousness first. You'll resurrect them, then they will reign with us for 1,000 years. They will reign with us 1,000 years. That is, work with us 1,000 years, getting the earth, bringing it back to its original. Not the nature state that we see today that is deteriorated to where there's disease and sickness everywhere on earth, among humans and animals. And of course, they can't find enough drugs to treat them, but that was part of the problem. The drugs like penicillin, it was created with the use of a computer. And of course, that's where the drugs started. They all started in my lifetime, in fact. But the use of the computer, as Yahweh said, the increase in knowledge. Well, they learned to do a lot of things with the use of this computer, the increase of the knowledge. Well, the drugs and the drug business is one of them that we'll see, and the dates of them. And then, of course, they turned all of that to the military too, and even making drugs that they could pass out to poison people, poison the enemy. And germ warfare they call it, making drugs to go in your meat. And now they're saying, we've made a mistake here. We're going to have to do something about this because this drug's in the meat. You know, it's getting out of hand, and the people are becoming immune to these drugs. So when they go to the doctor and the doctor gives them a shot, they're already immune to it. Well, how did they get immune to it? They're eating it from the grocery store in their meats. This is how everything is backfiring. The Babylon is falling. It's falling. Like we're rising. This is the same thing that means, only they're going down. Their ways are going down. Everything that they had, that they loved and cherished, that they made so much money off of and made so many people well. I brought it out before that penicillin, it wasn't but a few months after it was introduced till people were getting immune to it. This going on in their sins, and they had to go get another shot and another shot and another shot, and pretty soon the penicillin wouldn't help, wasn't strong enough. So they started searching for stronger drug. Well, they've run out of anything to search for. They've used up every parasite that's in any place, and so they can't create any more. So they create a mixture of parasites, and the doctors call it the shotgun treatment, where they give you a big dose of everything, hoping something in there might go to the spot and kill this bugger that's bothering you. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the song lead. Back to the next speaker. I love you!